Okay, starting again. Looks like this is working. So I'll take questions in just a moment. Greetings, by the way, from southern Portugal, where it's warm and sunny as usual. I just want to reflect for a moment on the theme of spiritual awakening through Spanda. Now, this is a unique doctrine of the Tantric tradition. It's not found in classical yoga or Vedanta or other non-dual traditions, but it's found in Shaiva Tantra and in Buddhist Tantra, though not under the name Spanda. And Spanda means expansion and contraction, or more specifically, an oscillation or pulsation of expansion and contraction. And this describes the nature of our experience all the time. There's always expansion and contraction happening on multiple levels, and at the same time, something can be expanding while something else is contracting, right? And when I say something, it could be sensory experience, it could be thought form, it could be feeling, it could be emotion, it could be anything, right? Now, awakening through the principle of Spanda, through this dynamic quality of consciousness to expand and contract in multiple ways on multiple levels all the time, the key here is very simple. It's that as human beings, conditioned by various factors, we tend to resist. We tend to resist expansion when it gets sort of too expansive, and we think, oh, that's a bit much. And we resist contraction. We're often afraid of contraction, and it can feel very, very dense, or we're afraid of something disappearing that we like, or we're afraid of something, a kind of dense emotion, for example, right? And so we're constantly, most of us, in this mind world of good and bad. That feeling's good, this feeling's bad, and resisting various aspects of our experience. So in the principle of awakening through Spanda is actually twofold, but first and foremost, it is learning how to not resist the natural cycles of expansion and contraction. Learning how to not resist in any way the natural cycles of expansion and contraction, but rather ride those waves, and just to be immersed in the dynamic flux of experience without making any of it wrong or clinging to any of it or pushing any of it away, right? But then there's also a subtler, sort of deeper level of awakening through Spanda, which is paying attention to the arising of each new phenomenon or each new energy state, and paying attention to the subsiding of each new phenomenon or each new energy state. So when you're paying close attention to the arising and subsiding of everything that arises and subsides, then you begin to tune into the formless ground, we could call it, right? The ground of being. Now, we don't have a good word for this because it's not something that's known in most languages and most cultures, but it's easy enough for anyone to discover it in their direct experience if they are sufficiently patient. So with patience and attentive awareness, you begin to notice that new experiences or emotions or sensations or perceptions arise spontaneously out of this formless ground of being, this still silent spaciousness of existence, this no-thingness, if you want to call it that, and subside back into that same ground of being. And so therefore, this principle of awakening through Spanda is, in the first instance, to become intimate with and non-resistant to all the permutations of energy, right? Perceptions, conceptions, sensations, emotions, all forms of energy expanding and contracting in your experience moment to moment, to fully allow all of that, to not resist any of it, and to be with it. You can also learn to find a still point within it, right? And that's sort of like befriending shakti, one might say. And then you befriend Shiva by attending to the formless ground out of which all the phenomena are arising and into which they are subsiding. Okay, so that's a little bit about Spanda, which we're going more deeply into next week, is it? When we have the Spanda online retreat. Okay, now there's people asking questions and stuff here. Let's see. Nice to see all of you. 97 of you. Hopefully we can get to 108. So Spanda is the theme for the retreat later this month, online and in person. And the retreat in June is a responsive retreat, meaning to say it will be improvised on the basis of who's actually there, rather than announcing a theme in advance, which is something I've been wanting to do for a few years, and we're finally doing it somehow. So that's nice. Okay, let's see. So you can ask your questions. Let me get this a little steadier. Aaron, I think it's from Colorado, says, is there a correlation between Tai Chi, Shaolin, martial arts with Tantra? I'm not sure what you mean by correlation. Are there overlapping themes? Yes. Is there influence? Possibly. I don't know. That's not really my field of specialization. But I was recently looking at some teachings from the Chinese Zen tradition, specifically the teachings of Huangpo and Linji, also known as Rinzai. And I was kind of delighted to discover that there is a teaching on Spanda, not with that name, in Chinese Zen, which then got transmitted to Japan as well. So I don't know to what extent this teaching about expansion and contraction as fundamental to our natural, authentic experience. I don't know how much that teaching, flourished in these East Asian Buddhist traditions influenced by Tantra, but certainly it was there to some extent. Someone asks, what are the similarities, differences with the Tao Te Ching and Tantra? Sorry if my Chinese pronunciation isn't perfect, but it's something very close to Tao Te Ching, which is a beautiful text by Lao Tzu. It's probably more than 2,000 years old. There are overlaps between the teaching enunciated there and Tantra, but I'm not really qualified to comment in any detail on that. We need a kind of maybe a podcast discussion with a scholar of Taoism to get accurate there. Someone else asks, could therapeutic modalities be effective in examining the contraction and expansions within awareness? Don't really know what you mean. Nothing's really more effective than mindfulness, than paying attention to the details of your experience in this open and non-judgmental way, So, I don't want to cover the mic. Okay. So I don't think a therapeutic modality is needed, but perhaps sometimes guidance is needed. Sometimes a meditation teacher might be effective in helping someone be aware of all the different sorts of contractions and expansions in their experience, because most people are just aware of their thoughts, specifically the loudest thoughts and emotions, and not really aware of the whole of their experience. So that, of course, is key to non-dual tantric meditation, is becoming aware of the whole of your experience. And finding all the places you're resisting your own experience, and then softening and relaxing in every time you find yourself resisting your own experience. And it's a curious thing, but this resistance happens instinctively for most people, right? There's this it can manifest somatically, it can manifest psychically, or both. It can manifest in different ways, but people instinctively resist their experience until they learn not to do so. So it does take training and practice. Someone else asks, we're sort of jumping around here, which is fine. What is the relationship between Abinavagupta and Adi Shankara? None. Zero. Abinavagupta never mentions Shankara. None of his compatriots ever mention Shankara, and they were writing around the year 1000. So scholars take this as proof that Shankara was not yet famous in the year 1000. Like, of course, we have to reject hagiographies, fictional biographies like the Digvijaya that depict Shankara traveling all over India and defeating everyone in debate. No, there's no reason to suspect that actually happened, as opposed to being a text composed later by devotees of the Shankara lineage to extol his greatness. No, but none of Abinavagupta or his lineage, none of those guys ever mention Shankara, but they do mention other Vedantins like Mandana Mishra. So they probably simply had never heard of him in the year 1000, and Shankara's renown grew very slowly and became his thought became more known later. Now, the non-duality of Advaita Vedanta is originally very, very different from Tantric non-duality. In the subsequent centuries, they sort of converged, but originally, Vedantic non-duality argued that consciousness never does anything. Consciousness has no shakti. It has no power or dynamism, and it doesn't ever do anything. It's completely quiescent. It's shanta, right? It's completely still. Whereas Tantra argued the exact opposite, that consciousness is innately dynamic and transforms itself into the substance of every experience whatsoever. you know. So that's quite a different teaching. So then in Tantric non-duality, the world is real. The world is a real form of consciousness. And in Vedantic non-duality, the world is an illusion, a mere appearance, and consciousness hasn't actually become anything. So that's a pretty significant difference. And why is that difference? Because the Vedantins were, of the opinion that if consciousness actually became the substance of experience, that would taint it. It would sort of corrupt it in a way. It would be a descent from its pure infinite nature. And the Tantrikas said no. Consciousness becomes the substance of every experience without relinquishing its nature of complete freedom and divinity, as it were. So this is actually a big topic that would take more time to get into. But that's kind of an initial summary of those differences. Now, how did the convergence happen? Well, Vedanta was more and more influenced by Tantra over the centuries. So they didn't sort of equally converge. Rather, Vedanta skewed more and more towards Tantra. It became more and more Tantric, all the way down to almost the present day, really. And so Tantric texts like the Saundarya Lahari got retroactively attributed to Adi Shankara, and Tantric practices like Shri Chakra Puja are performed by modern-day Shankaracharyas and their predecessors as well. So that's interesting, right? Because Tantra is very much the center of gravity in this particular dynamic, right? Vedanta skewed heavily towards Tantra over centuries, not the other way around. Okay. Okay, somebody says, can you please explain the differences between Chit and śūnya concerning the tantric layers of the five-layered self, as explained in the book Tantra Illuminated? And this person says, śūnya is a dynamic void, too, I think, filled with energy spanda, so what is the difference to Chit? No, it isn't. It isn't. The experience of śūnya, or the state of consciousness called śūnya, as defined here, is this total silent stillness, total spacious silent stillness. Okay, in that experience, there's no energy perceptible. Okay, so some people take this to be an ultimately transcendent experience. It's a kind of samadhi, right? You could call it nirbija samadhi, among other terms, right? So it's the experience which is the highest and the ultimate for Patanjali's Yoga Sutra and for certain schools of Buddhism. So the whole point to the five-layered self for the non-dual tantrikas is to say, oh, actually, that's not the ultimate. That's not the highest state of being. It is totally transcendent, but total transcendence is not the goal. It's not the ultimate state of being. Okay? So the encouragement here is to go beyond this still silent spaciousness, even though it's very, very beautiful. Well, actually, some people are terrified by it. It's just the void of absolute nothingness, and they don't want to stay there. But other people, find it to be extremely beautiful sort of experience. It's pure nothingness, and it's very restful in that state. It's not unconsciousness, right? It's not like deep sleep because you're aware. There's just nothing to be aware of. Awareness is aware of itself, and everything else is void, so the encouragement here is to go beyond that and to discover that the ultimate reality is simultaneously transcendent and immanent, right? So chit, the ultimate reality, is not really a level in the same way as the other ones, because it's simultaneously transcendent and immanent. So it pervades all levels and all aspects of being. Okay, so now you can experience it as the void now humming with a subtle presence, as it were, right? But that's not the only way to experience chit, right? But in meditation, when you go beyond śūnya to chit, it might be experienced like this: the absolute silence of the void gives way, seemingly, to a very subtle sort of vibrating presence that both is you and isn't you. It isn't the you that you think you are, it's something far, far vaster. So one way of explaining this is that when you first encounter the void, it's so silent and still compared to everyday experience that you just don't notice that fundamental pulsation, what Abinavagupta calls that kimchit chalana, that ever so subtle vibration is there. And then after becoming absorbed in the void, then you can notice it. But the idea is you may not notice it if you've been taught that the void is the ultimate reality, as some Buddhists are taught, and classical yogis are taught, because again, it's equivalent to nirbija samadhi. So chit is dynamic, radiant, no thingness, manifest as the substance of whatever experience you're having. Okay, so that's the point. It's not just a state of consciousness you can have in meditation. It's the radiant void, but it's also the radiance of your experience right now, right? Chit, consciousness, we have no good translation for it, but it is the radiant no thingness manifest as the substance of your experience right now and in every moment of experience. Okay? So in that sense, it transcends transcendence, if that sort of makes sense. It's not ultimate in the sense of being above everything. It pervades everything. So that's the whole point to non-dual Tantra, is that it says the most transcendent state is not the ultimate or highest or most desirable state. Okay. Someone asks, is the Nâṭyaśāstra by Bharata Muni a Tantric text? And the answer is no, but it does receive a commentary by Abinavagupta, who of course is a Tantrika, but when he comments on the Nâṭyaśāstra, he is not writing as a Tantrika per se, he's writing as an aesthetic philosopher, right, an Alankara Shastrin. So, because Abinavagupta was a polymath, right, an expert in multiple fields. Okay. So someone else says, I have studied Tantric Hatha Yoga and experienced Spanda prior to this without understanding what it was when meditating. Now understanding what the sensations I experience are. I'm interested to know. I wonder if, does Instagram cut off your question after a certain number of characters? That was Natasha, and I don't know if there's more to that question. that got cut off, maybe. But first, let me comment on this phrase, Tantric Hatha Yoga. Well, there isn't really such a thing. This is a modern phrase that we see people using, teachers using, and I think they mean by it that they teach a physical yoga with tantric influence, that they've studied hatha yoga and tantra, and they're blending them together. We just hit 108. Very auspicious. um, but this is not. None of the tantric authorities would think that that was a legitimate thing to do. Why? Because by definition, real hatha yoga is a yoga of force. It's a forceful yoga, right? And it involves a lot of effort in pranayama, in bandhas, in mudras. It's a sort of stereotypically masculine, forceful, no pain, no gain sort of practice. And Tantra, by definition, is not. It's a more stereotypically feminine, sorry for the gender essentialism, but you know what I mean. It's an easy verbal expression. Tantra is the way of gentle and sweet effort. It's the easier path, right? The authorities call it that. And they specifically reject, like you see it right there at the beginning of Recognition Sutras, chapter 18, where Kshemaraja specifically rejects the difficult and hard to master practices of hatha yoga in favor of these more easeful and subtle methods that he expounds in the 18th chapter, right? And we see that theme repeated. So these are considered two different modalities that are not really compatible in the same way that a soft, gentle approach is not really compatible with an aggressive, forceful approach. Now, of course, people nowadays are often using the term hatha yoga in a different meaning from its original meaning, right? Which is indeed the yoga attained by means of force, right? So that's a whole issue. And when Jim Mallinson comes out with his multiple publications on early hatha yoga, this will become very clear that this is not a tantric path. It's influenced by tantra in certain ways, and they adopt tantric practices. For example, in the Shiva Samhita, they adopt many tantric practices and into hatha yoga, and they are very interested in this in the tantric system of chakras and the yoga that utilizes a kind of ascent through the chakras. So they adopt all this material from tantra, but it's fundamentally a different path. And by the way, tantra is aimed at women as well as men, and hatha yoga originally was aimed exclusively at men. And we know this because there's all these instructions on seminal retention, which are not applicable to women. And the hatha yoga texts never say, oh, by the way, if you're a woman, then do this variation on the practice. No, they don't assume any women practitioners, which is different from Tantra, where women practitioners are assumed. Okay, someone says, can you join the June retreat when you haven't read Tantra Illuminated? Well, sure, but why don't you just, read the first 1/3 of Tantra Illuminated, because it's easy to do in a month, or listen to it, an audiobook version. Okay, someone else asks, after a moderately dramatic Kundalini awakening 5 years ago, there's now a regular sort of being overtaken by bliss in the entire body. Can you speak about how this sort of thing culminates? Well, it's hard to predict, because any given person's process with what is called kuṇḍalinī can be uniquely different. But one possibility for culmination is what the tradition calls Jagadananda. So there's these 7 sort of levels of bliss, and the highest level, in a sense, is Jagadananda. Now, you might think the highest level is the most explosively exquisite orgasmic bliss possible, but no. In fact, the highest level is the most sustainable form of bliss possible. And this Jagadananda, or all-encompassing bliss, is the unique joy had only by one who is perfectly content to allow the coming and going of all that comes and goes. Okay, so the unique quiet joy only had by one who is allowing the coming and going of all that comes and goes, and is perfectly content to see that which comes come and that which goes go. Oh, now I see the rest of Natasha's comment. So Natasha says, I'm interested to know what you experience in Spanda and how to expand the experience. Okay, so when you say, I want to know how to expand the experience, the very question itself already indicates a major problem, which is that you're opposing yourself to the fundamental doctrine of Spanda, which is to allow every form of expansion and contraction completely, not to manipulate experience in any way. Okay, so the whole point here is to not try to learn any technique to manipulate your experience, to make it more expansive or less contractive or anything, right? Because even when the manipulation is very subtle and well-intentioned, it is still a form of resistance to reality. So that is not the path to sustainable awakeness or liberation. So in terms of the practice that I recommend, it's called non-transcendental meditation, right? And I don't mean to denigrate those who have spent years and years in what's called TM, transcendental meditation, right? But Tantra articulates a non-transcendental form of meditation, and by that I mean not trying to attain some higher state of consciousness or different state of consciousness, but rather becoming intimate with the totality of your experience in such a powerful, beautiful way, right? And ceasing to separate yourself from your experience. So in this practice, then, you are not interiorizing awareness. You're not trying to find the void. If the void appears, that's fine. But you're not trying to get anywhere. You're not trying to ascend or descend or escape or get peaceful. You're not trying to be spiritual. You are presencing the whole of your experience as fully as you can, and slowly dissolving the impulses which cause you to get fixated on one small part of your experience, like your thought stream or your emotions, right? Or something else, whatever you get fixated on. It's to relax out of that fixation and presence the whole of your experience, and be with all the spandas, all the expansions and all the contractions, and to do this sort of rigorously, because on the one hand it's very easy because you're not required to do anything but be with your experience, but on the other hand it's very difficult because we are conditioned to almost constantly fixate on one very small part of our experience. right? Like the stream of thoughts. So it does take practice, and it's very, very different from a kind of meditation where you're going into a trance, or getting pleasantly sleepy or dull or numb, right? And it's very, very different from a kind of meditation where you're trying to reach some higher state of consciousness, which is very blissful. And the reason that doesn't work is because no matter how blissful you get, no matter how high your state of consciousness, it's always temporary. Whereas this practice that I'm describing now, this Spanda practice of presencing the totality of experience, applies to everything, right? So if you perfect this form of awareness, it applies to everything. It allows you to be liberated in every moment of your existence, not just when you're in a higher blissful state or an altered state, right? And this is why in this lineage we also, in general, oppose the use of psychoactive and psychedelic substances for enlightenment, meaning to say we don't oppose them for some specific purpose, like to resolve some specific trauma or something. That's fine, that's different, right? But we do say that you cannot advance 1 inch towards real enlightenment or sustained awakeness through altered states of consciousness, because the whole point here is to discover the true nature of everyday consciousness, and to discover that there's a lot more to it than you had previously realized. Okay? So it's not about a ban on those substances, chemicals, and plant medicines. It's about realizing that altered states of consciousness don't help you awaken to the truth of your everyday state of consciousness. Which, and the point here being that people imagine that my everyday consciousness and divine consciousness are two different things, but they're not. When you get beyond fixation on the mind stream and immerse in your natural presence, in your true awareness, right, then you discover it and always was divine consciousness that's all-encompassing, that's infinite, and the ground of being, So in the Buddhist tradition, they put it this way, that ordinary mind is the Buddha, right? And they're not talking about the thinking mind so much, but also they are, because it's consciousness that becomes the thinking mind, right? So yeah, I was just checking out, Huang Po's transmission of mind. Jayasara has a beautiful recording of it on her Wisdom of the Masters podcast and Spotify channel. So Huang Po transmission of mind is this beautiful articulation of non-dualism in a Buddhist context. And that's part of what he says. He says, your ordinary mind, your ordinary awareness is the Buddha. But you have to discover how and why that's true for yourself. But yeah, it's pretty crucial to realize that you don't need to go into some altered state of consciousness. As fun as that can be, right? Oh my gosh, now there's a whole bunch more questions that I had missed before. Oh, I can never get to all of these. Wow. You guys, there's like 100 questions now. Okay, let's see what I can get to. Yes, please come to Portugal. This month or next month would be great. Or the month after. Let's see here. Somebody says, talking of masculine, feminine, what would you say are the qualities that differentiate the two from the Tantric perspective? Right? So common misunderstanding here, because classical Tantra never discusses masculine and feminine, has no interest in gender essentialism. And that's the biggest difference between it and Neo-Tantra. In fact, that's how you can know that you're listening to a Neo-Tantra teaching, is they're talking about masculine and feminine, Classical Tantra doesn't do that, has no interest in that. So that's a dramatic difference. Someone says, referring to my earlier comment about gender essentialism, why do you have to apologize for using gender? Well, because I was speaking in terms of what we understand as stereotypically masculine and stereotypically feminine, but the apology is because there is no such thing that's inherently masculine and inherently feminine. That's a cultural construct, right? Apart from biology, obviously, male bodies produce male gametes called sperm, female bodies produce female gametes called eggs, But apart from biology, gender is a socio-cultural construct, and so there's no such thing as something that's essentially masculine. It just seems that way because of the conditioning of our culture. So if we have that understanding, then we can, occasionally refer to those terms, but they're not, there's no masculine or feminine energy that resides in us, right? That's just, these are Neo-Tantra language. Like if I'm being like sort of soft or something, if I'm being soft and receptive, somebody from the Neo-Tantra scene would be like, oh, you're in your feminine right now. And if a woman is being kind of intense and directed and focused and possibly slightly aggressive, oh, you're in your masculine right now. No. That's nothing but gender stereotypes getting essentialized, So anyway, that's why. Someone else asks, is asana used in Tantra? Yes, asana and dance and other forms of embodiment practice are used in Tantra primarily to move stagnant energy, to free up and move stagnant energy, because stagnancy is an impediment on the path of realization and embodiment. So that's a brief answer to that, because I need to go soon. Ben says, are there considerations to be aware of in meditating in graveyards or taking shakti walks, spontaneous walks in graveyards? Seems like a constructive way to confront death and mortality, but wondering if there may be reasons not to. No, there's no reasons not to. It's great to practice in cemetery. If Western nations had cremation grounds, that would be even better. I would tell all my students for sure, meditate at the cremation ground at least once a month, preferably once a week. Because it's much more powerful to see a body burning and be like, that's what's going to happen to this. Much more impactful. Graveyards are pretty anodyne by comparison. But do what you can. Contemplation of mortality is a sine qua non of the Tantric path. It's not dispensable, though it's often not given to beginners, lest it depress them too early. If you have a strong energy body, contemplation of mortality is vitalizing. If you have a weak energy body, contemplation of mortality is depressing or frightening. Okay, so that's maybe all I have time for. What do you recommend to develop towards awakening? Well, sounds like a plug, but it really is the answer to the question. That you join our online community, our learning platform, Tantra Illuminated Learning Platform, learn.tantrailluminated.org, because there you have all the tools that you need. Guided meditations, philosophy, contemplations, community, etc., etc. So there are a lot of tools that support awakening, and we've tried to make sure they're all on our platform, and we're continuing to develop that platform as well. Some people asked to be in the video. I don't know if that was a mistake or if you wanted to ask your question live. Someone says, how can you tell if you have a strong or weak energy body? Well, it's pretty obvious. Now, first of all, everyone has a weak energy body until they don't. Nobody automatically has a strong energy body, right? But the ability to digest your experiences, if you have a strong energy body, you're relatively free from fear. You don't go through the world worrying about what sort of experiences you'll have, because you know that you can digest your experiences. And when challenging things happen, you do digest the experience and you become stronger as a result. So there's a kind of positive feedback loop. A strong energy body just gets stronger and stronger. So when you're building the strength of the energy body, it's hardest up front. It's hardest at first. And it takes time, and you do have to be careful to not expose yourself to more challenge than you can bear. And you want to digest what you can digest and slowly get stronger and stronger, so that energy body's strength is built through digesting experiences and through doing energy body practices. Okay? And then it gets like a snowball effect. The stronger it gets, the easier it is to digest experiences, and the stronger it gets. Energy body work is not Spanda. The Spanda principle was outlined at the beginning of this video, so go back and hear the recording later. Spanda is about learning to be with all the contractions and expansions of your moment-to-moment experience and resist none of them. Energy work has a goal of doing something, like creating a strong energy body, and Spanda meditation does not have a goal of doing something, but has only the goal of being more intimate with the already existent nature of reality, the flux of experience. Okay. Oops. And now I think I'm out of time. Nice to see all of you. Yeah. Couldn't get to all the questions, but I need to go and give a teaching in this teacher training And I will see you guys later. Please join the online Spanda retreat later next week and explore in more depth. So wonderful to see you, and may each and every one of you experience the blessings of your very own essence nature and the infinite radiant divinity that you are. Om